Though a great many defensive structures and fortifications were constructed by the English along the James River during the Virginia Company period, the major threat against English colonization remains contentious. Even from the early days of the settlement of Jamestown in Virginia, there was a perception of two threats against the English. On one side, the immediate threat of the indigenous Algonquin people of the Powhatan tribes, who were hesitant but curious at the new arrivals. On the other side, the looming specter of sabotage and military assault by England's European rivals. Chief among these rivals was Spain, whose influence all over the New World put the English on edge. Even today, historians have diverse and shifting views on which threats were prioritized by the English. Some scholars believe that Spain's domination on the European continent and in the Caribbean created a specter of Spanish reputation in Europe and the Indies that was enough to keep the English focused across the Atlantic rather than in their own backyard. Other scholars believe that the immediate threat of Chief Powhatan and his indigenous people was the only focus of the English settlers as they battled almost daily with their New Virginian neighbors. Though both threats were real and tangible to the English colonists, which threat was considered more extreme would have had a lasting impact on how defensive structures, fortifications, and future settlements were built after the English first landed in Virginia. Different types and styles of defensive structures were required for different types of attacks. How England proactively and reactively defended their settlements tells us much about the threats they faced in the New World. English defensive tactics of the 16th century formed from the old styles used since medieval times, yet new tactics and techniques would supplant old knowledge as the century progressed. Some of the techniques for defensive structures and military fortifications came from the British occupation and colonization of Ireland during the mid to late 16th century. Other techniques were derived from those used by English allies, the United Provinces of the Netherlands during the War of Dutch Independence. The varied styles of defensive structures and military fortifications learned over the many conflicts in Ireland and the European continent would have transplanted across the Atlantic during the Age of Discovery. And yet, some defensive techniques were born out of need and desperation once the English had arrived in the New World and met the native peoples. In places like Jamestown in Tidewater, Virginia, Fort St. George at the Popham colony in Maine, and the settlements in Bermuda, different styles of fortifications were built with different intentions. Yet none of these fortifications would exist without the challenges presented first in Elizabethan Ireland.